Hey there, virtual world. Welcome back for day 14 of my 90-day live stream challenge. I'm Cassandra Austin McDonald. I am a coach for high achieving and heart centered women to be fulfilled in love and life while legacy building. And today is day 14 of a 90-day live stream challenge I am doing. And there went my light. So if you are tuning in, catching the replay, if you would type in hashtag replay so that I know that you are here and I can say hello. If you are new to my virtual world and you have never heard of me, seen me, or any of that good stuff, if you could type in that you're new here so I could welcome you to my corner of the internet, that would be awesome. And if you feel compelled and led to, please share this broadcast. You never know who needs to hear this. And as you're sharing, I'm sharing as well. And so we're going to go ahead and get this show on the road here. If you're tuning in live, let me know you're here live. Say hello so I can say hello back to you. Because if you don't let me know you're here, then I can't say hey, y'all. So I hope I said day 14 in this title. Okay. I have been doing my best to make sure that I am labeling the days as we count down to 90, because I know some of you have let me know that you are catching up on some of the live streams and you're actually keeping up and keeping track with this. So I love that. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you for joining me and being a part of this. Like I shared when I first started this, I've never done anything like this in my entire life. This is a challenge for me. This is new for me. And I am doing my best to bring some value to you as you are joining me on this 90-day journey. And so thank you for your time, your presence, your energy, your effort. I appreciate it. And if you are noticing throughout these days that we're here together and I share something that resonates with you or something that causes you to think or that inspires you even, if you would share this, that would mean a lot to me, because I believe that we never know who needs to hear this information. I remember when people shared mentors that I have worked with before, and it really transformed my life. And so if you feel like I share something that you think someone could really benefit from, then share this, and that would be amazing. So with that being said, I received another question last night. By the way, I love when y'all ask me questions, y'all, or even let me know if there's something that you would like for me to cover during these live streams, because that helps me to know how I can serve you best, right? And share things that are of value to you. Hey there, Chetta, how are you, dear? And so I was asked about my journey of pursuing my God-given purpose. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, because I'm actually inside of a program for coaches. And in this program, they were asking us to share our story of why and how we became coaches. And so this is really, really fresh on my mind. I literally just had to share this. And so this is fresh on my mind. And I am more than happy to share this with you all. And so I believe I was born to be a coach, which is my God-given purpose. One of my God-given purpose, that's an element of it, I would say. It's an element of my purpose is coaching, working with people, helping people. And I believe I was born to do this work. And I say that because of very innate ways about me ever since I was a little girl. I had a lot of wisdom as a little girl. I was connected to God as a little girl, but I also had this intuition about myself, about the way that I thought life should be. And so for those of you who don't know, I'm just going to share a little piece of my story, not the whole picture, but just a little piece of my story to give you a little bit of insight about what I'm sharing here. So I grew up and had a pretty traumatic and complex childhood. And I witnessed my dad, who was an abusive alcoholic at the time. He would beat on my mom, and him and my mom would have these very violent fights, aggressive fights, vulgar fights. And then I was also abused by my dad while my mom was at work for 16, 18 hours a day sometimes. And so that is kind of like the context, if you will, of me knowing at a very, very young age that something ain't right around here. Like, this ain't normal, you know? And so I remember as a little girl, I even remember as young as 4 or 5 years old, you guys, telling my mom to value her worth. I remember I used to march around the house and tell her she should value her worth. I remember deeply feeling and believing, which I still do to this day, that women are the most powerful creatures on this planet and that we can and do deserve to have it all. And I remember asking her, why won't she just leave? 4 or 5 years old, you guys. I would ask her, why don't you just leave? Why are you staying here? It was just this feeling I had inside. I can't explain it. No one told me these things. I didn't read it in a book anywhere. I didn't hear anyone around me say these things because it was almost like the family secret. You know, my dad used to always say growing up, what happens in this house stays in this house. And so we were not allowed to talk about this outside of the home. And I was not sure if anyone outside of our home was aware of what was happening within our home. And so I wasn't hearing messages about women knowing their worth or valuing our worth. I wasn't hearing messages about what we should and should not tolerate. It was coming from within. So that was the start, I believe, of this gift that I have, this innate gift of pouring into other people's lives. So fast forward to, going to school and getting my education and all that good stuff. I had a desire to work in the criminal justice system because I was starting to connect dots between people who committed crime and trauma, but also I minored in Black American Studies, and I was wondering why there was more Black Americans in the criminal justice system than any other group of people. And so I was intrigued. It was my curiosity that wanted to go help. So I started with juvenile delinquents first, and then eventually I worked with adult offenders for several years doing case management, went back to working with juvenile offenders again, and I would kind of go back and forth for a little bit, but I did that for almost 13 years. And it was in that work where I believe the calling over my life started to be right in front of my face. Now, I want to backtrack a bit before I even got into that career. When I was living in Southern Illinois, where I went to school at the time, this woman pastor who was very prophetic, she would prophesy over my life. For those of you who are not familiar with biblical faith and prophecy, some people would probably liken it similarly to what psychics do for people. I grew up in Christian faith, and so we would have prophecies. So she would prophesy alongside of other women in that church over my life, and they would always say that I had a calling over my life. And she would always tell me that I was going to help a lot of women. And she could see women lining up to come hear me speak. She would say these things to me, you guys. I remember one time she told me that the people who had hurt me most would line up to hear me speak. And I remember when I heard this, I was like, what the heck is she talking about? At the time, y'all, I was going to church because I was hurt and broken, and I was brokenhearted. My son's father and I were not together. He was dating his now wife. He had moved his now wife into the house me and my son was supposed to move into, and I was Hot Mess Express, y'all. I was just trying to heal, okay? So when they were saying all these things to me, I was like, what in the world are they talking about? I just wanted to know how I could heal my little broken heart. That's all I wanted to know, okay? I was hurting. And they were prophesying over me, saying I had this big calling over my life and I was going to help a lot of women and all these things. And I had the gift of healing. And she would always touch my hands and say, like, you're going to help people heal. And I was like, what is she talking about? And so, but that never went away. It always stuck with me. It always stuck with me. And so during that time, I continued on my journey, eventually moving back to my hometown in central Illinois, where I started my career working with both juvenile and adult offenders. Okay. So now I'm in this career and I'm helping people. Now, one time I was facilitating this group called Forgiveness and Healing with the youth that I was working with at the time, and we had the workbooks out. And typically the way I would facilitate these groups is there were some prompts inside of the workbook, and I would engage in dialogue with the kids and get them to participate in things like that. And one day, one of the kids raised his hand and he was like, Miss Cassandra, well, how did you forgive someone who hurt you? And how did you heal? And something on the inside of me kind of plugged into that, if you will. Knowing that I had been educated and trained to do that type of work, but I had not done the work myself. I had started doing the work a little bit, but I did not go all in like many of you have seen for who I am today. I'm all about personal growth now. However, back then, the healing I was so-called calling myself doing before I started that career was because I had a broken heart. My son's father and I were not working out. He moved some woman into the house that me and my son were supposed to move into, and I was pissed off, and I was hurt, and I was angry, and I was upset, and I wanted to be over it. There was no bigger picture of healing for me. And so when this kid asked me about what did I do to heal, it really resonated with me, because in that moment I realized that I didn't do the work. I realized I still was harboring unforgiveness against my son's father, against my real father, against my mother for staying, against all these people in my life, where I was like, man, I'm not healed. I didn't forgive nobody. As a matter of fact, I'm still mad as hell. That's what I was thinking to myself. Now, I didn't say this to the kid, okay? What I said to the kid was, we're not here to talk about me today. We're here to talk about you. I deflected. But that moment started to water the seeds that had been planted a few years prior, when I was going to that church and when I was really trying to figure out how do I get over this broken heart. And from there, it just kind of started to snowball, where eventually I started to get into my own transformation journey, experiencing my own transformation and healing. And what happened is I went from working with juvenile delinquents in a group setting to transferring over to another department and working with adult offenders individually. And so during this time, adults who had committed an offense or a crime of some sort was court ordered to be on my caseload, where I had to supervise them and ensure that they were following the orders of the court. Some of them were addicted to some pretty hardcore drugs. Some of them had some mental health challenges that they had to sort through. And so there were different things that were going on with them that they needed to sort through that were causing them to commit criminal offenses. And during that time, I was really getting heavy into personal growth and healing and learning about self-love and learning about shifting your thinking and things like that. And I was wanting to share it with my clients, y'all. However, where I used to work, we could not do what's called healthy self-disclosure. That's why I call it self-disclosure. We couldn't do that. We had rules, we had protocol, we had guidelines, and we had to follow it because we received all of these federal grants and funding and all that stuff. You had to follow all their rules. And so I remember I used to get frustrated because I was like, man, if they would just let me teach what I know, they will probably get some breakthrough. So then, y'all, I got a little sneaky. I ain't gonna lie. I got a little sneaky and I started sprinkling a little of my stuff to see if it worked. And it was working. One of my clients back then used to be addicted to crack cocaine for years. And as a result of me sprinkling a little bit of what I was learning, this woman transformed her freaking life, y'all. Transformed her freaking life. She went back to school. She became a nurse. She got her own place. She was clean. And she changed her life. In fact, she used to come back up to my job to thank me periodically. And she would give me updates and she would let me know what was going on with her. And when that happened, I knew this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to help people. But the problem I was having in my current career at that time was that people were forced to work with me. So it was only occasionally where I would get people who were really interested in what I was talking about. Sometimes I would make a book recommendation, or sometimes I would, sprinkle a little bit in what I was learning, and they were intrigued and they would come back to our next session and they say, tell me a little bit more about that last time what you were talking about. Some people really didn't want to be there though. They were angry, they were frustrated, they had no intentions on changing their behavior, and they were really just there because the court forced them to be there. The judge ordered them to be there. And so that was the part of my work that I was starting to struggle with, was because people were forced to be there by the judge, by the court. They didn't want to be there. So then I had the thought, what if I work with people who actually want to do the work? What would happen? And that is when I started to entertain the idea of becoming a coach. I was noticing clients who were forced to work with me experience some positive behavioral changes. Y'all, always to the point where colleagues, even my own boss at the time, my supervisor, they would stand outside of my door and they would listen to what I was saying. They were saying, like, you say the most profound things to them. Like, where are you learning this stuff? Because they knew what I was saying wasn't what we were being told to do. And so they were realizing, like, she over here doing something a little different. What's going on over here? I was putting a little secret sauce up in there, y'all. I was putting a little bit of my sauce up in there. So literally, my supervisor and my colleagues and what have you, they would stand outside of my door while I was talking to clients and listen. And they would let me know what I was saying. And so I knew, y'all, I had a gift. I knew it. I felt it in my soul. And so from there, what ended up happening is I started to notice signs, if you will. There were these synchronicities that would happen in my life. And I'm trying to remember the first time I learned of one of the conferences I went to. I started going to conferences. I used to go to like Joyce Meyer conferences first, and then I remember I went to some other like faith-based conferences, but then at some point I started going to Lisa Nichols conferences because I watched Lisa Nichols in The Secret back in like 2012 or something, or 13. And so that planted a seed of like, oh wow, I could do that. I could be that, And so she really has been a big source of inspiration for me as a woman of color and as a former single mama, of the magnitude of how big your purpose and calling could be in your life. I saw this woman who, parts of her story and her life reminded me of mine. And that was another, seed planter for me. And so I recalled that during this time where I was really starting to think about, what if I actually work with people who want to do the work? And I don't remember how I came across one of her programs or trainings. I don't remember if I looked it up or if I don't remember. But all I know is I started enrolling in her work, learning how to be a speaker. And I started, I flew out to San Diego and was going to her conferences and, all that good stuff. And it just kept snowballing from there, y'all. I was investing in myself, And so really, like, when I think about my journey of discovering my God-given purpose, that's like the best way I can describe it, of how it began. Now, what I do believe also is that your purpose is not some elusive big thing that just you realize one day. I believe that our purpose are the daily things that we do that creates the big purpose in the grand scheme of things. For instance, I was going to work and I was intentional, even though it was a toxic work environment at the time. And, for a long time, you guys, I was the only woman of color there, the only person of color at my job at some point. And so I was surrounded by people who were kind of racist, and I just went to work intentional, focused on my clients. And so I was doing my purpose even then at my 9 to 5. That to me was purpose work. And so what I believe helped me to connect with my God-given purpose is I stopped looking at purpose being some big thing out there somewhere that I have to go chase and find. And I started being intentional about my life on a day-to-day basis and finding purpose and meaning in my life day to day. And over time, it unfolded into other things. I started having thoughts about what if, and I started to feel more connected to some things, and I started to get the soul nudges. And so what I want to encourage you all to do is to shift your perspective about how you see purpose. Purpose is not some big thing that's out in the sky somewhere and you have to go chase and find it. Purpose is already in you. It's in you now. The differentiating factor between people who are living in their purpose and people who are looking for their purpose is being present and deciding to be intentional about how you live your life. And so back then, when I was working in this very toxic work environment, I was the only woman of color for a period of time. I was surrounded by people who didn't like people who looked like me. They would talk about my hair all the time because I've had this big red afro. And yet I still showed up with intentionality to serve the people that were on my caseload. When I would be in my office, I would play worship soaking music or meditation music. I remember I had this waterfall thing that you plugged into the wall, and it was like a waterfall, and it was soothing, and I would have essential oils, and I would make it smell good. And I created a whole vibe in my office, y'all. So when my clients came in, they were more relaxed. That was purpose. That was purpose. And so I believe in, there's this saying that I say, if you use it, please quote me. It's my words, y'all. But aligned action activates actualization. I believe what I was doing then was being in alignment through my action, which activated the actualization of me living in my purpose, what you all see today. Okay? So what do I mean by that? Who I was being. I wasn't looking for my purpose. I was being in it. I was being in it. I was working on who I was being. And then it appeared like it fell in my lap. You'll hear a lot of people say that it's like it ran into them. It's like God chased me down. It was like God put the purpose in my lap. And so shift your perspective about how you see purpose and start asking yourself day to day, what am I doing today to live my life in purpose, on purpose? I started with my work at my 9 to 5. Before I had a business, before I wrote a book, before I spoke in front of anyone, before I had a private coaching client, before I ever had anyone pay me to share my wisdom and knowledge with them, I was purposeful in my then now. Didn't even realize that's what I was doing, but I would look back in hindsight and say that's exactly what I was doing. I was being very intentional with how I was showing up to my job and making decisions that were in alignment with purpose. So I hope that answers your question. And for those of you who are listening and you're like, man, I really want some support and guidance on my journey of living my soul's mission, my soul's purpose, I would invite you to connect with me for a discovery call this week, because my rates for private coaching are increasing this Friday. So you literally have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You have 3 days before my rates increase for private coaching. And so if you want to work with me privately, I highly recommend you book a private discovery call with me. I will put the link in the comments somewhere when I get off here, or you can private message me and I will shoot you the link over. And a discovery call is a great time to see if we're a good fit for working together. And I like to, get a feel for each other before accepting new clients. And so if you are wanting to elevate in your calling, in your soul's mission, you want to do some mindset work, you want to do some self-image work, maybe you want to do some confidence work so you're putting yourself out there more boldly, then let's connect for a discovery call. I'd love to see how I can support you with that. So with that being said, you guys, that completes day 14 of the 90-day Facebook live stream challenge. Y'all, day by day, chipping away. Day by day, we are chipping away. So thank you for being here, whether if you're live or catching the replay. I appreciate you. And I will see you all tomorrow for day 15. All right, take care now, and I'll see you soon.